Hey, what's up, everybody? We're over here in Denver, Colorado at this huge conference called SIGGRAPH, which is a worldwide graphics conference. Just to give you an idea of what level of conference it is, Mark Zuckerberg and Jensen Huang from NVIDIA were the keynote speakers for this conference. So it's about 30,000 people. And I've had the pleasure of being invited here by Mcleran, who is the director of audio for the Unreal Engine. How's it going, Aaron?
Good.
So
glad you came.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're here, and it's really interesting because it's such a different experience for us, or for me, coming from a pro audio perspective and hanging out with graphics people and graphics developers and people who are discussing audio, but more in the gaming context.
Real time context.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we got together here was because you were actually giving a section that was specifically towards real-time audio here for SIGGRAPH. So like I was saying before, SIGGRAPH is primarily geared towards people who are working with graphics.
Yeah.
And now this is more of an introduction to real-time audio for those developers. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing with SIGGRAPH and what the intention behind this course was.
So first of all, I have been at Epic for 10 years, working in video games for longer, about 15 years now, and in all aspects of audio. So from sound design, for a while I was a sound designer, composer for a bit, and then been a programmer now for about 13 years. And so from that side of things, I've grown, developed a strong appreciation for other disciplines that we collaborate with quite a bit day to day, and one of those is graphics. So graphics, or real-time graphics rendering, turns out to be what I would consider a sister discipline to real-time audio rendering, so strongly that it's almost like every single sub area in real-time audio rendering has some analog to graphics. I've even said at Epic, my lead has a background in AI at Epic, and I've joked that maybe a better structure for our audio programmers should be to stick them over into a general purpose rendering team, because there's the kinds of problems that we deal with are very similar, from both like dealing with platforms, performance scaling, architecture, like how the code's structured, our experiences interacting with artists and tech artists, and all that kind of thing are very, very similar. And so there's a lot of overlap with those two areas. And but that said, it's not well known that there's a lot of overlap. So I'm often finding myself having to be like, well, you know that thing that you do in graphics? Well, it's the same thing that over here in audio. And I've had that strategy at Epic for many years now, and it's been very successful there to kind of make the case for audio and investing in audio and putting the resources needed to make audio a real high quality thing in the world of video games. And so that sort of trajectory of thought naturally leads to this idea that maybe we should take that case to the broader graphics community. It's not just Epic or even just other video games, but making the generally broad case to people that maybe audio rendering and graphics rendering have a lot of similarities, and therefore maybe we should be talking to each other more often. And the motivation for that is both to encourage awareness of how audio works so that maybe there's more investment in real-time audio problem space, but also straight up collaborations like, hey, this is what we're doing over in audio. Maybe there's some really cool techniques that you guys are thinking about, or women are thinking about over in graphics that might apply to the audio domain, and maybe we can have some conversation, and maybe there's some really cool things that could happen. So in other words, this conversation happened in a fluid way at a kind of a social event last year at SIGGRAPH. So myself and my lead audio programmer, Phil Pop, came out to SIGGRAPH last year. Epic invited us, which, by the way, was a huge thing. Like, Epic always has a big presence at SIGGRAPH. So there's a lot of, obviously, Epic is big into graphics. And it was a big thing for them to invite some audio people to go out to SIGGRAPH. I think it was one of those like, hey, Aaron's right. There's a lot of overlap. Maybe some audio programmers would get something out of SIGGRAPH. So we came out and we went to a lot of talks and was a little disappointed at the lack of audio. There was a couple that we went to. So audio is not brand new at SIGGRAPH. It's been there. There's always been a thread of audio at SIGGRAPH. In fact, I guess in the early days of SIGGRAPH, there's a lot more of audio. Anyways, so Phil and I were chatting with some of our other friends from school. We had like an alumni get together. And it turns out one of our mutual friends from graduate school, Andres Burbano, was the SIGGRAPH chair of 2024 this year.
Small world.
And over some beers, we're chatting, and I gave him the pitch, like, man, there needs to be more audio. Audio and graphics are similar. I feel like the communities could really get something out of it. Apparently that stuck. So a couple months later, he calls up and he's like, hey, we want you guys to put on an audio course for SIGGRAPH for 2024. And that's how it happened. And so that kind of thought process and thinking resonated with Andres and other people at SIGGRAPH, so that they essentially curated a course for us. And that's what we gave yesterday, was our first course on that. Anyways, I'm going on and on here, a little bit meandering here, but the idea is for that course was to give an introduction to real-time audio rendering in the context of SIGGRAPH. Give it a nice broad view, invite a couple of experts in the space to give deeper dives on some specific topics, and hopefully plant like a little bit of a seed here to show that there's maybe some interest. And we had a pretty good turnout, a lot of graphics people. You were there yesterday. I think we got exactly the kind of questions I was hoping for, with graphics person asking like, hey, so we do this thing over in graphics. It's like sort of a bread and butter technique for this or that. Is that something you're thinking about over in audio? And some of them were yes, and a couple of them were like, actually, no, that would be I'm not aware of anybody thinking of anything in that domain. I think it would be a really interesting thing to explore, the cross-pollination happening already, And so I thought it was pretty fun, pretty successful. And so my background kind of is lending itself to creating this type of situation, and I'm optimistic that maybe we can continue it on.
That sounds great. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other guests that have come along and why you invited those specific people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Phil and I we were here last year at SIGGRAPH, and when Andres asked us, or actually it was Ruth was the curator. So Andres thought it was a good idea, and then Ruth got involved to help us put it together. She curated, I can't remember how many she said. She's a volunteer for SIGGRAPH and curates a lot of these kinds of things. And she got really excited about the idea and was working with us. And so we put our strategy together to think about like, what should we do for the first course? So we kind of did a mind map of the field of audio rendering, and we're trying to think like what would be relevant, how to go deep on. We always wanted to do kind of an overview section. So the course was divided into roughly 5 sections. We always wanted one of them to be kind of like here's all of it in a map. It's like a kind of from the view top of a mountain. Here's the kind of pieces that. So we wanted to do that, and then but then we wanted to do kind of a deep dive. You can't go super deep. Each one of these could be, when you talk about a course, 1 hour lecture on a topic is not a course. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what topics can we go deep enough in to inspire people to go learn on their own? We were thinking about a deep dive on music, or a deep dive on hardcore sample accuracy or codecs or rendering architecture or that kind of things. We ended up deciding roughly on a couple of things that we thought were probably the most interesting to a mostly graphics audience. The original idea for it was to be like audio shaders was the idea. Like, so we have this kind of analog and real-time audio in certain areas which are roughly analogous to the idea of a programmable pipeline, which is obviously huge in graphics. Mm-hmm. So in graphics, they have this shader language that is universal. It's a standard that graphics programmers can do really powerful things at a very low level, per pixel, per vertex, and they can have complete control of exactly what's happening in graphics. And in audio, we have some analogs to that, like, for example, Max MSP, Pure Data, Super Collider, this sort of domain-specific languages, or like ways to control signal processing at a lower level. Metasounds, the tech that I'm working on, would be in that family of things. And so we thought a talk from somebody that's a luminary in that space would be great. Mm-hmm. So we invited David Ziccarelli from Cycling 74, who is he owns Cycling 74 and is a giant in that space. So we reached out to David and said, hey, so we're putting this course together in SIGGRAPH. Here's our pitch for for that section, would you be interested in talking? And he said, yeah, but I don't want to do exactly that. I want to do my own thing. We said, absolutely. We'll do whatever you want. Like,
because he's Dave Zuccarelli?
Yeah, do whatever you want, dude. Like, make it exactly the course you want. So he kind of tweaked it a little bit to talk specifically about requirements for real-time audio and controllability. So his talk became less about like, how do I put together a signal flow graph or whatever, which would be really cool from David Zigarelli. But he was very interested in, I guess, recently kind of exploring some stuff in the space. I think inspired by Gen, which is this really exciting new development in Maximus P. So he put a ton of demos together talking about these perceptual aspects to time perception and the blending of events into the frequency space and temporal space, and kind of built some beautiful demos of psychoacoustics and really proved beautifully the value, importance of reducing latency for real-time control. And he did end up talking a little bit about the architecture, about how you need to structure your audio engine to be real-time. And I thought it was a brilliant talk, and it was very inspiring. He also was a kind of Zen, like, wise thing to him. So just, I think we all kept writing things that he would say to be like, oh my God, like quotes, you know, that you could put on a t-shirt, you know. Just, some people come up with those things.
Yeah.
And so it was a great talk. So that was one idea. Another one was physics. So a big thing in graphics is like physical-based rendering. I mean, there's a huge amount of stuff in there. Like, how do we simulate light propagation? You know, global illumination is a big thing in Unreal Engine with Lumen. So that space is really big in graphics, and we have an analog in audio. It's, I would say right now, mostly kind of very old school approaches, but there are some people doing some pretty significant cutting edge research, and they're hitting a lot of the same kind of problems that graphics hit. And so we were thinking of the people in that space. Probably one of the biggest luminaries is Nikunj Raghavanshi is his last name, and he is basically the lead of Project Acoustics for Microsoft. They're, in my opinion, one of the best people in the space, balancing this like heavy duty physics modeling with practical constraints of real-time audio. And they're right now deep in pushing that stuff out on all of the Microsoft games projects, and I think it's just absolutely amazing work that he's doing. And so we called him up and told him about it, and he agreed and was totally in agreement about like the value of it. And so his talk was the problem space. He didn't talk about Project Acoustics. He used some demos of Project Acoustics to kind of illustrate what we're talking about, but the gist of it was the problem space nicely defined and laid out in a comprehensive and clear way. And I think it really made the case for you know, that there needs to be a lot more investment in that space. And I think it was inspiring to a lot of people in the audience. We got some really great questions around from it, and I certainly was inspired. And Nikunj is a great speaker. I think that was also really successful. And then the other deep dive was what we felt like a natural idea for a graphics conference, was like, how do you take an audio signal and, you know, extract information from it that then can be used to drive visual systems, sort of the audio analysis to audio visualization part. And we thought that would be a great talk, because with some cool visual demos, get some like Niagara particle systems and Unreal Engine, or some other audio visual demonstrations. And so there we kind of hit a wall with thinking about, like, the original idea of Phil and I was that we wouldn't give any talk, by the way, but we wanted to find other people in the industry, and we had a hard time finding somebody. So if you're out there and you're an audiovisual expert, like of audio analysis in the space, let us know. Maybe we could have you speak next year. But we knew lots of people. There wasn't anybody we could find that was quite in the balance between audio analysis and understanding games and game architecture to kind of meld the two. Yeah. There's plenty of people that are doing really cool audio analysis, and plenty of people that are doing the other side, but not quite somebody that came to mind as a luminary in that overlapping space, other than Phil. So we're like, I was like awkwardly in a meeting. I was like, Phil, I think you might be the luminary. Maybe we should have you do the talk. And he did a great job. Phil did a great job. His name's Phil Pop, by the way. I don't know if I said his full name, but so Phil has been at Epic for a while now, 4 years, I think. And he's now our lead audio renderer. This happened a couple months ago. We kind of restructured our team. I can talk about that if you want. but Phil has a background in DSP. I met him in graduate school, so he was, like I said, a friend of Andres, myself, and a bunch of MAT, the school I went to, Media Arts and Technology at UC Santa Barbara. A lot of us are around the industry, so you kind of run into them everywhere, which is weird. It's a good cohort, I guess, at that school. But Phil and I met there, and he was like a whiz at DSP when he came in. And so I learned a lot of DSP from Phil. And a couple years ago, I asked him to join Epic because I needed somebody that could work well with, that knew that aspect of it. And he wasn't from games. He had done a whole bunch of stuff in audio analysis. He worked for Grace Note for a really long time, doing audio analysis for music applications. And so he's got game experience now. He's been with us for a while, and he knows that other spot. So I don't know if there's very many people that do have that combination. And so his talk was great. He kind of went through the overview of all of the different sub-main algorithms used for analyzing audio signals, from your basic FFT stuff to, perceptually balanced spectral transforms that balance for music, and then one for balance for speech, and envelope following, loudness perception, and all that kind of stuff, and kind of explain the basic building blocks that you could use to then go deeper on, and gave some cool demos. And then finally, yesterday in the course, we all got together and just had a sort of panel where we just answered questions. We had so many questions. I don't know. It was pretty cool. It was never ending.
That's right.
And we just kind of talked about various topics and stuff. It was a very successful day.
That was great. And if you have the opportunity to do this next year for SIGGRAPH, where do you think your focus would be? Would you do something that was the fundamentals again, or would you look to progress on?
Yeah. So the whole pitch for the course that we worked on with Ruth was to be annual. We wanted to do it every year, and this would be the start. That was the idea. So in a way, it was a pressure relief from us, because we're like, if this is our only chance, how do we, so it's like, well, we don't have to cover everything. So there are so many deep dive topics that we could go on forever. One of the general ideas that I have, I kind of presented it yesterday at the very beginning of the whole course, where we could take it. So the idea is that every year, if we do this again, and I hope we will, we'll have always kind of like an overview section. And I don't need to do it. It can be anybody. Anybody can come in. We can invite somebody to come out that just can give a kind of intro, and their own flavor and their own approach to give the intro that lays out the domain in a kind of global way. I think that's useful. To me, that feels like it sets the sort of foundation. And it would be cool to do that every year, because you can kind of see different people's approach to answering or doing that kind of a talk. Like, maybe my approach isn't the best approach, but maybe somebody else has an interesting approach. Like, how do you introduce all of real-time audio in an hour? That's a hard challenge.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then I would like to have maybe a balance of topical overviews, like we did today or yesterday. Yesterday was all topical overviews. But it would be cool if we could have that balanced with more case studies, like people actually doing things. Like, I tried this and did this to solve this specific problem, and it helped us in this way. That's sort of the model that this other course that exists, that in some ways North Star for how we could take the real-time rendering for audio course. There's been this long-standing course at SIGGRAPH called Advances in Real-Time Graphics. I can't remember if that's exactly the name, but it's like the equivalent for graphics. And it's existed for like 15 years. It's apparently, I'm not a graphics person. Again, this is my second year at SIGGRAPH. It's apparently very, very popular. I've gone to a couple sessions. A lot of them are much, much more in that model, where it's like, I've worked on this game or did this experience, and I came up with this technique, or I solved this problem. It's much more like that. I think right now the problem is we can't go there yet, because at SIGGRAPH, it's not, people are still like, what the hell, like audio, And so it helps at the early stages to do overviews, but I would like to see it evolve into something where we all have an understanding of the foundations, and we can get into these deeper dives, and by we all, I mean like people at SIGGRAPH, people that are coming here,
right.
Audio people that come here, maybe there's broader understanding in graphics, and maybe the course can go to a more, version like that, versus like, you're a student and you want to learn how this overview works. I think a blend of both things would be ideal. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that I think could be particularly interesting is also getting some crossover from the pro audio side.
Yeah,
trying to get some more people.
So the name of the game here is there's no zero sum game. The reason why we keep saying we had multiple of us yesterday kept trying to answer the question of why we kept saying real time audio, and there's many answers to that. But one of the differences is pro audio, where pro audio has a real time component, but at the end of the day, it's like you're exporting an asset from your digital audio workstation, and you click, you do your real time part, which in a way is like your previs. Even if it can sound like high quality previs, it's still previs. And then you get your thing, and any pro audio sound designer knows to not really judge it until you listen to the exported thing, because it makes a huge difference to run at high sample rates, high qualities. All your reverbs are probably low quality version, in your preview, and then in the export, it's like the highest quality. Then you listen to it. That is the non-real time part, is that you sit there when you're watching the progress of the bounce. That's a non-real time render. So real time rendering is like the thing that is your product that the end person experiences is rendered in real time. It's like you shipped a piece of music, and it's like your digital audio workstation project.
Right.
That's what a game is, right? And then they can interact with it and they can change it. That would be the model, right? You're designing your thing in your digital audio workstation, and then rather than saying export and making a file that you share in Spotify, it's like, okay, here's my digital audio workstation project, push play. Right. And also you can use a controller to interact with it. That's what a game model is, right?
Yeah.
And the difference between those two paradigms, is so fundamental that it kind of redefines everything. The way an audio engine is architected is, I hear this is changing. Digital audio workstations are changing their architecture to actually be more game-like, but a game audio engine architecture is architected differently than something designed for DAW style non-real-time render. Interestingly, by the way, this is just an aside, fun story, but real-time and non-real-time audio rendering engines are architected differently. But we had this problem at Epic where there was a feature request for Sequencer, which is like our tool for what you call it, like linear media. So you put it's kind of like a DAW, but it's it's more intended for animations and scripted logic and this thing. If you ever see an in-engine rendered cinematic in an Unreal Engine game, that was probably made with Sequencer. Anyways, you can see very quickly that making videos for that kind of stuff, literally, it's a straight up video product. It's a non-real-time video. Someone will want to have a export button and be able to render everything at ultra high quality, way higher quality than you would if you would just did video capture. And that was a feature request. And of course, our audio engine was architected not to do that. We had to, after the fact, kind of figure out the path of least resistance to make our real-time audio render non-real-time. It's to invert it to support the sort of render. And it ended up not being that hard, but you just have to be careful about certain things. But it's a sort of deterministic non-real-time render export. And we support that, which is kind of a fun application to invert it, to take your everything's designed for real time and then go actually no, we're doing a non-real time. But anyways, it's kind of like the inversion where DAWs want to architect it to be more optimal for real time, to make the preview experience better, and then we're doing it for non-real time. So that happens a lot. Going back, so to answer your question, it's all the same shit. It's all the same. We're all working together. And there's no hard boundaries in anywhere. And so a pro audio developer, all of the skills you're learning there will absolutely be useful and applied in the real time. There's just certain slight differences that justify prefacing when we say real-time audio rendering. And it's enough to put it there. And it informs all kinds of things from your threaded architecture, how you deal with quality, your thinking when you sit down to write your DSP algorithms, making it work at scale across 9 different platforms and all that stuff. It's a deep part of what makes it quote unquote real time, but it's fuzzy. So absolutely a talk about pro audio versus real time thing would be great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the way that you were comparing it when we were talking earlier, that game audio is almost like Ableton, but with the trigger
Yes.
trigger view in Ableton.
Yeah, so there's some DAWs that have intentionally blurred the lines, like Ableton Live. Like the real-time part of it was so important that they put it into the name, right? Live. So that you could tell as a consumer of buying this tool set that it's not just your DAW. In fact, I think it started first more like a live performance tool and less of a DAW. I remember I used like Ableton 1, and there was a whole bunch of basic features for that people use in regular DAWs that didn't exist in the version 1. It was very clearly like 80 to 90% a DJ tool
Yeah.
and 10% a sound design tool. And clearly over time it's crossfaded to, I don't even know what the percentage would be now, maybe 50-50, I don't know. But clearly in the early days, there were some basic things you couldn't do. If I recall, you couldn't like take two sounds and crossfade them. Do you remember, did you use Ableton back then?
Oh yeah, I used it.
You couldn't crossfade it. It's like,
Yeah.
guys, it was a crossfade.
That didn't come in until I think 7 or 8.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was earlier than that. That's funny. But so the point is that like I've heard a lot of sound designers in the game industry who say they use Ableton Live for all of their sound design. I certainly prefer. I shouldn't say which ones I prefer, but that's one of my favorite DAWs. I love Ableton Live. One of my favorite reasons why I love Ableton Live, which is the ultimate blurring of lines, was Max for Live. So that was a collaboration with Cycling 74 and Ableton. And I mean, when that came out, I like redid it. I like, because I've always done like sort of experimental, which we should talk about, by the way, in this context of real time versus pro audio. I think Max in that space has always been in the real time side of things, like primarily.
Yeah.
And so Max for Live was like the ultimate blending of two things where you could do your max patching, but in the context of a DAW in a clean way. A lot of us, myself included, had been using Live and Max anyways for years and years and years. Like all of my stuff was already, like my shows and my performances and all this stuff would be like an Ableton patch running, Ableton running with clips and everything. And then a Max patch scripted, and I was just communicating either through open sound control or MIDI, or actually primarily MIDI, communicating with the two. And it was always a pain in the butt, you know? And so then having Max for Live, you were like, it was mind blowing. So point is that Live is amazing because that sort of understanding of real time performance and performativity and interactivity is kind of woven in its DNA. So yeah, the lines are not clear.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying about Max MSP being a performative tool. So it is real time.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people use it for performances.
But you can do a non-real time export as well.
And then you encapsulate that into a Max for Live patch.
Yeah.
That becomes almost. We think in the pro audio world, we think of that as real time, like when you think of a VST or when you think of something like that. But
that's kind of like a previs.
Right.
So like if you look over into the graphics domain, like there's a lot of tools where people are doing things like that. Where it's like you could almost think of like the Unreal Engine, because it has this non-real-time export, as the whole thing is just previs, right? Similar to DAW, where like 95% of your time and the previs quality is getting so high. Like that's the big exciting development in the world of graphics, is that the real-time rendering is getting to the point where it looks as good or close to what used to take 30 hours to render a frame. You can do it in 30 milliseconds. Like that's the exciting thing, you know? In audio, we've been close to high quality for a while. So this jump from real time to not real time isn't as big of a deal as the olden days in graphics. You get what I'm trying to say? It's like DAW, it's almost like you forget that it's actually a preview. That's kind of what I was saying earlier, is that like sometimes when I'm trying to do a mix, I get frustrated. I'm like, why does it sound so muddy? Like, and I get frustrated and I'm like, oh wait, let me export it first and listen. I'm like, oh, it's so much better. Like it does make a difference, but it's subtle. It's not like an in-your-face difference, you know?
I guess DJ software would probably be a good comparison in terms of real-time.
Yeah, DJ software would be very real-time. If it's intended for performance, like an instrument, it's real-time rendering.
Yeah.
If there's a human performing it, like on stage, that's real-time rendering.
Yeah.
But as soon as you export it in an unreal time export and it's a file and you listen to it, that's not real time. David Ziccarelli made a really great illustration. It was beautiful. He talked about He's like, you take your audio file and then you play it in Spotify. He's like, in a way, you could call that real time because the interaction is the pushing of the play. Right. And I wasn't playing an audio file before, and now I'm playing an audio file, and I can stop it, and I can play it again. Like that is kind of like an interaction and control. And so you could make a really horrible argument that that's what we mean. That's also qualifies as real time. And you could also say, like, because it is actually getting decoded in real time. Like it's an encoded asset. It's getting streamed over the internet. It's probably an Opus. I don't know what codec they are, but Opus is likely. And then it's decoding. Like all of that's in real time. But that's not what we mean when we talk about real time audio rendering. We're talking about like I can fundamentally interact and change it dramatically at real time, like a DJ software.
Yeah,
like that's real time.
That makes sense. So tell me a little bit more about MetaSounds. So we had a talk probably 3 years ago. I think we may have been the first people on the first video interview to actually talk about it.
It was like UE 5.0 or maybe a preview even, I don't remember.
Yeah, and I'm sure that a lot's changed since then, and I was curious.
Some things have changed, some things never changed.
So
some things are always the same.
Maybe we could start off with like, what is MetaSounds for anybody who doesn't know?
So UE 5, our big audio feature was MetaSounds. I like to say it plural, by the way. Like a lot of people like MetaSound, but for some reason that sounds weird to me. I don't even know what our official brand is, but I say MetaSounds. So MetaSounds is intended to be the sounds of the metaverse, which we can talk about more if you want, but that's why it's called MetaSounds. In fact, I wrote a pitch for it early, like in 2020, that was literally MetaSounds : the sounds of the metaverse. And
just to clarify, by metaverse, you don't mean Mark Zuckerberg's definition of metaverse.
No, not at all.
We're talking about something different.
Yeah. It's basically, and this is important because it kind of defines the programming model of it. It's supposed to be essentially 3D real-time rendering of assets in a kind of interoperable context, if that makes sense. So it's like the internet for 3D interactive assets. And it's not just assets, it could be anything like games, media, interactive live shows, concerts, anything. But it's a sort of the internet for interactive content is the idea. So like the internet right now, if you like have an audio file, a web browser knows how to play it, right? There is like standard interfaces or a video file, like the web knows how to play those things and can serve that content up. So your web browser and individual people are making these content and they're all working together. But this is like sort of taking that next step. So there's a broader idea of asset interoperability and that kind of thing. In a shorter term view of it, it could mean what we're doing with UEFN and user-generated content over on the Fortnite side. But more broadly speaking, it's just 3D rendered content that can be swapped out and interoperated.
When you say content, do you mean like all the visuals, all the audio, all the interactions?
So it's more like each domain. This is an interesting question because it's like you could take a whole character that knows how to do all of its thing and swap it in, but MetaSounds are more on the sound thing. It's like the audio part of a thing, and it's definitely philosophical where you think of like where the boundary is. If you imagine like an aggregate complex object like a weapon. Video games, so everything is characterized in violence, but so you imagine like a weapon. It's made of many sounds. When you reload it, and all the different aspects of that weapon. When you shoot it, it might sound differently if you're running low on ammo, or it might sound different if you're really far away. It might have all kinds of aspects to it. So it's a set of bundled sub-assets. So in the world of the metaverse, if you wanted to like give somebody the behavior, all the complicated audio of that to some other thing over the internet and have it like properly work, having it 30 assets with all kinds of complicated interactions, it would never work, right?
Right.
You'd have to completely start from scratch every time, and it certainly would not entail this idea of like an asset made over here worked correctly over here, an asset being a broad definition of that. So MetaSound is supposed to encapsulate that kind of thing such that the behavior and the events and all the data that it needs is clearly defined and communicated outside the metasound. So we have a metasound input. We also have metasound interfaces. All of those things could be essentially queried outside of the sound, and other systems could be written such that they give the data needed to properly play that sound, but only the sort of interactions in the state, but all of the internal logic of that sound can be encapsulated and shared. It's not a radical idea. It's like sort of good programming, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like separation of concerns, clarifying your interface, not, making stuff private versus public. It's like kind of object-oriented programming, but broadly speaking, at a larger scale, and something that could traverse through whatever the metaverse is or becomes. Nobody really knows what it really means, but at the end of the day, it's like a broader view on what it means to make content and share it. Mm-hmm. So this is like the big idea.
Right. So the metaverse is like encapsulation then.
Yeah. So the idea of, in general, is interoperability of different assets. And a good way to think about it is like what music would look like in the context of the metaverse. In a way, the internet already is the metaverse. So what we're really talking about, by the way, is bringing 3D interactive content to that space of asset interop. So think of a web player for music and how that works today. You got you're making an asset. You go home to your DAW, you make some music, you publish it. You have a submission form. You got to get it in the right format, get it the right metadata, and then all of the like web players of a particular format can play it, and it can say like what the artist is, like any kind of stuff that's encapsulated with that. That's kind of a step towards this idea of asset interop. The difference is, for the metaverse, the idea is that it's immersive, interactive, 3D, that kind of a thing. So let's take, what would that look like for a music player? The idea is that the asset itself is not static. The asset is real-time rendered in the sense that we talked about earlier. Like, its decisions are being made on the time. The person listening to it can make decisions and control it. They can have interactions with it dynamically. They can customize it. Maybe it's responding to data around it, like maybe the music is responding to the weather, and you put it on your phone and it's automatically getting data into it so that it's like the interaction might be from where you're listening to it. Maybe it's geolocated, so your music album that somebody makes is unique depending on where you are in the world or something like that. Right. You can imagine anything in that space where like the content that you're experiencing is fundamentally real-time rendered. This is not a crazy new idea, but what is new is the idea that you can make content to an open standard that then can be dropped into a generic player, and that experience can be easily distributed and experienced correctly across any number of types of players, right? So you might have iTunes, Spotify, whatever other players are for a static piece of music, and it works correctly across all of them. Well, now what would it take to do an interactive, real-time rendered 3D type of experience across all these devices?
Right.
That's what we mean. And so Metasounds is intended to be getting into that direction, where it's the bundled assets, inputs, outputs, interfaces. It's all the things that it needs to describe itself to support interactivity and customization and real-time rendering.
Right.
None of these ideas are new. It's all like anything in humanity. It's like the synthesis and the context and where you're putting it and all of these things put together. Like I said earlier, it's like good object-oriented programming, data encapsulation, public and private. At Epic, we talk, because we're working on Verse and this whole thing, which is another big thing about what we think about for the metaverse. We talk about public and private, and some data might be public with a capital P type of thing. It's like public data that anybody in the world could access versus private. It's like it's not just a construct for thinking about code. It actually literally is like things are public and private, and so anyways, it's not radical, it's just the context. And Metasounds itself is not radical. Again, it's the context. It's like in this game engine that is a fully supported 3D content generation machine. Right. And so then in the context of video games, the idea is that I make a video game here, and like the assets in my game might be rendered in a different game if you wanted. So it's like, you know, you make a cool character in game A, and maybe that character can render in game B accurately and correctly without anybody being involved in the middle. It just knows how to do its thing. That's the idea.
Interesting. So if I were to summarize, tell me if I'm right or wrong, that if we look at the web now, most of the content that we interact with is static, as in it's we click a button and then it just plays, or it does its thing, and then that's it. So what you're talking about when you say your version of the metaverse is that you're talking about...
it's not mine, it's kind of all of us. But.
But a richer experience in which you have different players or different spaces that you can plug in your format, which in this sense would be meta sounds, and that like an MP3, it would just know where everything needs to go, and that it's a two-way, bi-directional type of experience.
Yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like an asset format that is fundamentally supporting real time at the end of the day. And again, going back to what we meant by real time, it's controllable, interactive, and dynamic. And then so like the problem goes from, we have these things that are interactable, controllable, dynamic. How do we standardize it so that these assets can interop? That's it. Interop meaning I make it for one thing and it can render over here. Like that's it. Like that's the problem space. And the fundamental thing there is what drives heady things of the broader idea of sharing content.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a game either.
It doesn't have to be a game.
Yeah.
It's 3D interactive content. We say 3D, but I would say like it just kind of could get rid of that. It's just interactive, real-time content. Yeah, so that's the big idea, and MetaSounds is trying to support that. Are we there yet? No. This is the progression. That's the vision. The name of it is sort of where we want to go. One of the interesting things about working at Epic is the Unreal Engine, all the tech that we do is very public. When we check in code, it goes into the main branch of our code base, and it shows up on GitHub, and our licensees can check it out. You have to sign a EULA to see it, but like our code's out there. We definitely have internal code branches where that stuff is not public, but the engine code, if we check in a feature of the engine, it's public. And so all of our development in engine really is in view of everybody. There's not like a sort of secret thing. If it goes into the engine, if it's getting checked into the engine, like today I could go check in the engine, it'll show up on GitHub, you can download it and check it out. And so my point being is that like we develop things in a it's like everything's in progress. So there's not ever a point where I'm like MetaSounds is done, you know. It's like version preview was down here, version 1 is, you know, if you know, it's a line, and MetaSounds is intended to be like way up here, and we're probably here, you know, and like we do a dotted line projection where we want to go, and the reality sometimes does this, but what I'm trying to say is that MetaSounds wants to be there. Are we at the world of interop today? No. There's tons of problems that need to be solved in a multidisciplinary way across everyone. Like, there's nothing unique about audio in a lot of these things that I'm talking about. The same thing could be applied to literally any other asset. But one of the differences between audio and, say, for example, like Niagara and Unreal Engine, Niagara is the tool that does particle systems, is that we didn't have the analog of Niagara for audio. Like our old technology in UE4 was sound cues they still work in UE5, but not even in a million years up to the challenge of this thing that I've been describing. And so there wasn't that kind of thing that encapsulated and had the kind of power. And I don't see that kind of thing actually at all in the game industry, at least not in any public middleware, where there is this idea of an encapsulated thing that can potentially be interop. Like middleware like Wise and Fmod are very much like kind of a global, like, here's my game and here's everything laid out for everything. MetaSounds is absolutely about encapsulation. In fact, we encourage developers to not make. There's a tendency that some audio people to like make a MetaSound for all kinds of stuff, and you see in their MetaSound is like a big switch statement for all these things, and it's like a meta sound. And it's like, no, think of it as an encapsulation. Again, it's philosophy, like how you define things, you know. The branch of philosophy would be ontology, you know, the definition of what is. But try to structure your thought such that it's like something that can be thought of as an entity that then can be, you know, interrupted and shared somewhere else. That's the structure that people should be thinking about when they make content with meta sounds. But you could make a single meta sound for your entire game and do everything with a big giant like trigger input and branch for everything. You could do that. It's just not the intention of the design. And you would probably hate yourself down the road if you built your game off of that way of thinking.
So what are some of the most exciting things that you've seen people create with meta sounds?
Oh, yeah. So I did want to talk about, when we're going back to the music thing, it answers that question and is something I wanted to bring up earlier. There are some really cool projects people are making that I think represent the potential of what's possible. And they're realizing that potential like right away, but it's like, they're still kind of niche. One of the projects is, you know, Mix Universe by Chris Zuko. You should check it out. We did a live interview of him for Unreal. It was called like LFG, Unreal LFG. I think it means like looking for group or whatever. It's like where Epic community folks interview devs, and Chris Zuko got interviewed by our main community person, and then a couple of us audio folks. And so there's like a multi-hour deep dive into his project, which I recommend you guys checking out. There's so funny moments where I'm singing and like he translates it into a system. But in a nutshell, what it is like this music creation toy tool game, not a game. It's hard to describe what it is, but you visually build these environments that also make sound. And so you're like making a cool, physical, beautiful thing that is also music. And then it's like fully 3D and you can literally fly through your music that you made. So it's like going back to DAW analogies. If your DAW itself was a beautiful work of art, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
Let me add some music. Let me get this note. And now it's this beautiful thing in space that's like reacting to the sounds. I want to connect it over here. And that connection itself is like wiggling and beautiful. And so some of the demos he was putting together looked like spaceships and structures in space that were itself also the music. Yeah. So it's like music and sculpture and architecture and animation and abstraction. Anyways, this weird and creative approach. That's all built off of meta sounds. In fact, he's using an API that we built for Fortnite called for Patchwork. I don't know. It's a whole other thing we should probably talk about. But there's basically an API and blueprint that allows you to script meta sound patches that you can connect them together dynamically. And so Mix Universe was actually the first thing that shipped even before us. Again, because we check our stuff into UE5 main that goes into GitHub. So we're like, this is the story of this. We're working on Builder API for our own purposes. And it's like, we check it in. Zuko, who I guess he's got like an email that says anytime any of us check it in, he like jumps in and looks at it. I honestly think he's watching all of our changes. And he saw this come in and he immediately recognized that it would solve one of the problems that he was experiencing with Mix Universe, because it was already using meta sounds. So the way he had built it before the Builder API was he made a single meta sound that was for the whole project. And it was like this, every possible combination of possible parameters he put into one single meta sound. And it kind of worked, weirdly, but the performance was bad because every single instance of the meta sound had everything that could possibly happening. And so the number of sounds that he could play got limited. That's another reason why you shouldn't pack everything into your sound, because every meta sound is instanced. That's one thing I think a lot of people don't quite understand, is that it's not like a singleton meta sound just standing out there. It's like every time you play a sound, it spawns an instance, which is a very different paradigm, for example, than Max MSP. It's like, it's very instanced. So anyways, he could only render like, I don't know how many, like maybe 100 sounds or 50 sounds or whatever. And he saw the Builder API. What that lets you do is build exactly the graph that's needed for the moment. So based off of the user preference. So in his thing, the person could, make a connection here, add a filter, do some kind of crazy DSP effect. And then he could, under the hood, take that preference and dynamically construct a meta sound that does just that. And then render only that narrow set of things. And then he could explode the number of meta sounds that he could render like hundreds of sounds, and the performance issues kind of disappeared. So he went and implemented that. He saw us check it in. He backported it to an earlier version of the engine himself, which was not easy, integrated it into his code, and then launches it and actually published it on Steam before we even shipped it. So that's like the weird thing about working. I mean, I wouldn't recommend people doing that, but you can if you are willing to take on that responsibility to like own the outcome of such a ambitious thing. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's a great project. And I can imagine the content that he makes with that in the earlier conversation about interfaces and stuff. I can imagine the music made by that in the world of a metaverse could then go into your web music player or some other game or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, I make music for the metaverse. I export it as my bundled experience, and then that could play somewhere else, totally outside of his application. Another example is Sonic Lifeforms, which is made by Mitch Doffler. We also talked to him. We interviewed him at Game SoundCon last year or the year before. And so what he's done is shipped MetaSounds as an app on iOS. And it's beautiful sounding procedural ambient music. It's got a little visualizer, so it's making art as it goes as well. He has it working so you can put it to like close the phone and just walk around and listen to your music as you walk around, and it's entirely infinitely procedural, and it actually sounds good, and it's all built on MetaSounds. Another example of a music application that right now his only distribution platform is an app on the iOS, and that going back to that in terms of distribution, Steam. So Zuko's thing's available on Steam. It's like these, app stores and stuff, those become the way for you to get albums, like I'm going to download an album and it's actually an app. Mm-hmm. It's not cool, but that's the right way to do it now. Mm-hmm. And then another example project just came out that I think is amazing, also available on Steam, is called Cycles by Patrick Hart. Patrick Hart is basically a technical artist, a sound designer, a composer. He does. Oh, by the way, Mitch is also a composer. He's a professional composer. But yeah, Patrick Hart is a professional composer down in LA. He does all a bunch of commercials and stuff. He published a experience. I would call it an experience on Steam called Cycles. That is essentially fully procedural music with like data sonification of forest fires. So he's got these kind of visualizations, and it's a really compelling, beautiful experience, and it sounds so good. Like, I don't know, he's got a really good attention to detail. Mm-hmm. So I recommend checking that out. Another example of like what new experiences could be made with this sort of approach to real time. So yeah, there's and more stuff like that. Within the world of Fortnite, we're doing some crazy stuff. So I was talking about it earlier. I was showing you some stuff. All of it, of course, built on MetaSounds. But if you think about it, it could be done by anybody. Epic, a couple years ago, acquired Harmonix. Mm-hmm. Harmonix is a game studio well known for music games. So Harmonix is all in on MetaSounds. They've integrated all of their tech into MetaSounds and actually published it in the last engine version, the Harmonix music plugin. And so basically a lot of the tech that a lot of their Rock Band and all these kind of games are built on, some of this stuff is now available for free. And they're just MetaSound extensions, MetaSound nodes, which you should check out, by the way.
That's incredible.
It's a good example of like how to extend MetaSounds because it's all the code's there. You can see it. But anyways, that tech was the stuff that was used to build these experiences in Fortnite. I'll give you an example of a couple. Of course, we have a Rock Band mode called Festival. Festival is your traditional kind of like music game. Mm-hmm. You have tracks going through and all the music and all that stuff. That's all MetaSounds. In fact, it's like one MetaSound, but they render the output onto different audio buses, and so they can spatial. Anyways, attention to details of implementation are important, but the point is that it's MetaSounds. And then another, probably more radical experience is, definitely, it's called Patchwork. So Patchwork is essentially like a 3D like software synthesizer in the context of a game. So you and your friends can actually log on to creative mode in Fortnite or UEFN and go onto these islands that people make and actually jam together and make music together at the same time. So it's like using networked communication to like create the experience of making music together. And it feels very compelling. It feels like you're jamming with people. At Epic, every Friday, the harmonics team just gets together and plays music, and they're all over the world, and they just make music together, and it's very, very fun. We actually had an internal audio summit where it's like almost everybody, not everybody, but most of us are musicians that work on audio, especially in the harmonics. So anyways, we met at HQ in North Carolina, and I brought in my trumpet, and someone brought their flute and guitars and drum. Someone actually got their drum set. We all were like physically doing jams, like playing music together. And then one of the harmonics devs whipped up Patchwork and started jamming with Patrick in it. And then someone had another computer, and then that actually became almost strangely more fun to have Patrick integrated to a jam with real instruments. It was actually really, really, really fun. And so it felt really dynamic. You could, in fact, jam with these tools. So all that's built on Metasounds, and Patchwork is what we built the Metasound Builder API to support. Mm-hmm. So when you make connections in Patchwork, that's actually using the Builder API similar to Zuko's project, where you're constructing exactly the Metasound graph you need based on your preference. Mm-hmm. So anyways, then the final thing, which is really cool that we're doing, is this thing called Jam Tracks. So if you haven't played Fortnite, you can go and it's like a new microtransaction item that you can get, like a cosmetic, and stored in your locker. And you can go and buy these bundles called Jam Tracks, which are often, some of them we've made, Epic people have made themselves, but some of them are like licensed content, where it's like, some Metallica song or something. And you get the music broken up into stems, like you get the bass line, the drums, the piano, or the chordal instrument, the vocal track, you get the lead instrument. So they're broken up into stems. Not the full song, mind you, it's like a segment of it. And they all work together. But the cool thing is you only play one of them at a time. So it becomes like your character animates like playing the drums, and it's like the drum part of the song. And you're just sitting there in the world. Everybody hears you playing drums of the part, but it creates a circle around you, and you walk up into the circle. And if you have a jam track, you can whip out another drum set if you want, or you can play the bass of a totally different song. So you end up creating this kind of fun mashes. And everything works well together. The beats are matched. The chords they all work together. And you can there's an interface where you can change the key and the tempo, and the whole jam circle changes the key and the tempo. And you can even change it to major or minor, which blew my mind for how they did that. But anyways, all of that is also Metasound. So it's like Metasounds talking to each other and communicating how to play this kind of crazy thing. Anyways, these are just some music things that are possible. There's so many more. And it's obviously not just music, but it's a very flexible system that lets you do some pretty crazy stuff that some of the stuff I've never seen in games. And it's very gratifying to make tech that is flexible enough to support these kinds of things.
Wow. So it sounds like Metasounds, in summary, is this playground of sound design, coding, music production.
Yeah. Audio production.
Yeah. Artistry, creativity.
Yeah. So, people listening, if you're familiar with Max MSP, it is definitely inspired by that type of thinking, where it's like, where I actually deeper think of beyond the technical details of Max or PD or any of these other domain-specific languages or scripting environments. What they're trying to support is a kind of creative coding or creative technical mindset of like just being creative, having fun, trying new things out and experimenting. It's inspired by that. That's like the hope and philosophy of what we're trying to bring. And the only thing that's really unique is its context. It's that it's in a game engine, and that it's really easy to get the data from the other systems versus having to send it with open sound control. Actually, I could tell you an interesting story of that. It's a side story, but the idea is that Metasounds is intending to give that kind of environment in the context of a game engine and encapsulate it so that it can support the metaverse. That's the primary thing. There's a couple of really interesting subtle details, but they're really just details like triggers and sample accuracy, and there's certain types of things in it that are kind of interesting, but philosophically, it's really just to support flexible creative coding and creativity in the context of a game engine with encapsulation and interfaces that allow interop. That's it. But just like Max, you can extend it. So Max has the ability to make your own nodes. There's tons of people that do that. Almost all of these languages do. SuperCollider certainly does. So you can, if you're a programmer, an audio programmer, you can absolutely extend any of these languages. Same with MetaSounds. And so it's like a plugin can add completely brand new functionality, like the Harmonix plugin does. Right. So we didn't have support, for example, a bunch of MIDI operations. And the community would ask for it. They're like, hey man, I want to be able to play a MIDI file, or I want to have a MIDI clock, or all these kinds of things. And we're like, yeah, you could do that. We tell the community, go add it if you want. And of course, Harmonix, a lot of their tech is based on MIDI. They just went and added it. And and then we're like, let's share it. So now you've got all these MIDI utilities, but anybody could have done that. Like anybody in the community could have added MIDI support. That said, there were some features that they added to the core architecture. Because like I said, MetaSounds is doing this. It's going up. So there were some core things they ran into that just underlying weren't supported. And then we collaborated on it and then added that to the core things. So the more mature it gets, the more I can confidently say you can just extend it to do what you want. But there may be, as I was talking to you earlier, there may be some core things that need to be supported. And just talk to us and we'll add it,
Yeah. One of the questions I wanted to ask is about the business model. So how does that work? So let's say that you create something interactive in MetaSounds. Now you want to get out, you want to sell it. How does that work?
So that's a little bit above my pay grade to talk in detail, but the gist of this, we have this thing called the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Okay. That's kind of the older way of doing it. And it's still the current way, but the plan, from my understanding, and I'll just be vague about it, go check out, do research on it to see the latest communication on it. But there's this new storefront called Fab that is intended to replace the marketplace and be sort of like a metaverse-style distribution platform. I can't really go into details on it. The plan is to be able to have these things exposed. I would like to see a storefront be able to preview the interactivity if it's possible, but that's a lot of. But that is the hope is to have assets that are, you make a thing and then you can distribute it and then people can grab it. So you imagine metadata tagging. So maybe where we talk about open standards of the metaverse, where a MetaSound interface for something may become a standard because a ton of assets are implementing it, and then you're like, oh, that's the one that the community has decided on as the standard interface for implementing this type of content, like footstep system, right, or a vehicle system or a gun system or some other thing. In this asset distribution, you search of maybe there's a way for you to search for audio content that implements X interface or something like that, or maybe the content tells you what interfaces it implements. And then you can say oh, this seems to be the interface that the community has decided is the one that is the standard. And then that's how it comes, is through usage, that kind of thing. You can imagine that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's incredible. So just a couple rapid fire questions before we sign off. So AI, there's been a lot of discussion about it here at
Rapid
SIGGRAPH.
Fire AI question?
Yeah, rapid fire AI question. You got 30 seconds, go. No, so what do you? So there's been a lot of discussion here at SIGGRAPH about it.
The AI is a big topic.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. The consensus that I've been hearing here at SIGGRAPH has been that the bigger companies, the companies that have legal concerns, they use some of it for their pre-production or just for idea generation, but it's not really something that they're really looking to get into for actual production work. And of course, in the music space, it feels like there's a divergence in terms of what's
it called? Suno, yeah.
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 So there's a divergence in terms of what we think of when we think of music creation or music creativity, and I just wondered if you could just give me some thoughts on.
So, as somebody who has been writing procedural music, which you could think of as old school AI music, not using language learning models and stuff. I'm a huge fan of AI in general. I in the most general sense of the term, where I think of it's things being intelligent about stuff without human intervention. I'm a huge fan. And I'm also open-minded about any new technologies and the exploration of it, anything that can empower creators to be creative. I was doing some stuff recently with Adobe Illustrator, and I hadn't used it in a couple years or a lot. And as I'm doing it, there's like little pop-ups. It's like, the little generator helper, as you're doing stuff. And I was like, let me try that. And like, sure enough, it actually was awesome. I typed in a prompt. I was trying to draw like an audio waveform, for some slide. I think I was trying to do an audio waveform for the talk yesterday. And it was like, I was like, oh, maybe I can get the AI to help me draw the waveform. And sure enough, it generated like a nice generic waveform. And I was like, wow. And then I kept going on with my thing. That kind of thing is amazing. And I can imagine if it was integrated, music AI integrated like that at that level, where it's like, I see you're trying to think of a cool melody or something. It's like something micro, and it's like a little clippy art, and then you can go like, oh, I want a melody that's like this, and then boom, plug it in and continue on, Something like that would be really cool, in my opinion. This is my opinion, where I could see it as like an aid, like a micro aid to some creative flows. The part where I'm not that excited about, the idea of using like a large language model to generate entire pieces of music, is not that interesting or useful in the context of what our field is, real-time audio, from the standpoint of like generating entire pieces of music that are static and linear is not really the problem that we're really struggling with in games, in game audio. Like, we have so many beautiful and amazing and talented composers. We have almost too many. And finding a composer that can make good content is not a problem. And we should be supporting that and paying composers to make music. The difficult part is making that music interactive, real-time, dynamic, and controllable. And I don't see how AI solutions are going to solve that anytime soon. So if you can integrate maybe AI tools that allow you to interact with music in interesting ways, that would be kind of an interesting direction. Back to the idea of smaller AI as elements in the creative process, that would be an interesting place to go. One of the applications of AI I'm interested in is how we can use AI for analyzing a scene. So we had a big talk yesterday about acoustical simulation, analogous to physical-based rendering, etc. If you could imagine, if you can train an AI model to understand a scene geometry, and then more quickly come up with the right settings, aesthetic settings to make it better, to kind of go from the old school smoke and mirrors approach that we've done in game audio for years and years and years, inform it from the acoustics, but then go back to smoke and mirrors, but informed by AI. That would be really powerful, where AI is like an optimization, so you don't have to do 20-hour bakes of acoustical simulation. The AI can just go, oh, you're in a small room, here's the settings for a beautiful sounding small room, type of thing. Or even propagation. Maybe you could train an AI to be like, the sound's here, the listener's here. I'm aware of the scene enough where I can just tell you, oh, here's how it's going to move. And it does it in a black box way, but you've trained it. That kind of space where AI could be a tool for optimization would be pretty amazing. And I don't think would upset anybody either from a creative standpoint. It's this is a painful algorithm, a painful process. It's slow. Let AI solve it. I'm really excited about that aspect of it. But in general, I'm not excited about AI being used as a way to replace artists. Because the fun part of being a human is being creative. And if you take that part out, then what are we doing? Are we going to make AI content to be experienced by other AI, and then we just go home and go to sleep? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyways, I'm open-minded, but I feel like reality will win itself out. There will be people that are thinking of it as a shortcut to cut out having to pay creatives, but that's not sustainable. And I don't think it's not going to compare in quality to something made by an actual human being, in my opinion, at the end of the day. So that's my take on AI. I have to say that my opinion is my opinion. It's a controversial topic, so Epic has their opinion. I think it would jive with what I said, but I'm not going to claim it does. I don't know. What do you think? But I feel like it's reasonable.
Sounds pretty spot on.
Yeah.
Okay, last question before we sign off. Common question that I'm sure that you get about metasounds. Can metasounds be used to make a DAW?
This does get asked a lot. Actually, somebody asked this as we're sitting here, that same question, and I answered it. So see if I can answer it shorter for here. In a nutshell, a DAW solves a different problem than what a game engine solves for. It's about linear content creation. Game engines are about dynamic, interactive content. And there are DAWs that cross-fade between that, and there's aspects of Unreal Engine and game engines that are becoming DAW-like. And I think when people ask that, I think they mean like applying DSP effects.
Right.
I think that's kind of where a lot of that question comes from, is they think DAW means VST effects chains. DAW means linear content creation. Mm-hmm. That's what it means. Game engines mean dynamic content creation. Effects are effects. Like both application models and uses have effects, and they have for years. Like that, I think there's kind of a little bit of a misunderstanding about games. Mm-hmm. We've had digital audio effects forever, since day one. Like you explained, like, hey, we got cool reverb. Oh, that means I don't need my DAW anymore. It's like, no, you still do. So, but there will be interaction between the two, communication. The worlds are coming together. Like again, Ableton Live is a great example. But there are stuff that we're interested in Unreal Engine, getting communication. I know Wise is doing some cool stuff with Reaper. There's a lot of exciting things in that space. But ultimately, DAWs are, at the end of the day, linear content creation, AKA non-interactive and non-real-time. And games are about fundamentally architected to support real-time and interaction. And so those two things are different. So it's not going to replace your DAW anytime soon. And also not going to replace Pro Audio. Pro Audio will always have a thing. It's not like...
That's right.
It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like suddenly games are going to horn in on the Pro Audio world or the DAW world or vice versa. It's like, no, we all are going to be doing cool stuff and working together. You know.
Great. Aaron, thank you so much for this talk. Is there anything you want to say before we start?
Well, I hope all of our technical difficulties don't result in some kind of weird discombobulation. But hopefully we'll be able to edit it to make it make sense.
We're going to blame GoPro. The camera's been overheating.
Yeah, I was actually Googling it. The GoPro 12, whatever it's called, has overheating issues. And it's like really cold in here, so I don't know what the issue is, but in any case, it was fun chatting.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. See you, man.
All right.